Welcome to another episode of the Root Cause Business of Medicine podcast. And today it's going to be an interesting episode. It's a little more techy than we normally go, but we're going to delve into a conversation with Travis Garland, who is from My Compliance Citadel. And we had a fascinating conversation at kind of this intersection of healthcare innovation, compliance, AI, and even some of the safeguards that kind of are put into place. What were some of your big takeaways today, Davin?
Well, I think it's great to know that there are people like Travis and his company that are out there putting together platforms and technology to enable us to use AI safely, right? Like they're as you'll learn today, their technology helps protect us, puts guardrails in place so that you can sort of determine how to use AI in an organization, even a small one, safely, kind of push the boundaries, but not necessarily have it, run the risk of breaking any policies or other regulatory requirements.
Yeah, that was the same concept that I really enjoyed in today's conversation with Travis, was the ability to get excited about how AI can really enhance what we're doing from a systems standpoint in a practice, and gathering data and analyzing that data and giving that information to patients, but doing it in a way that we aren't putting information out into a system or creating situations that can compromise patient identity, patient privacy. So it was an important discussion today, and I look forward to you guys listening in and seeing what you get out of our conversation. Welcome to the Root Cause Business of Medicine podcast, where we explore what's broken in healthcare and what we can do about it. I'm Dr. Erik Lundquist, and I've been practicing functional medicine for the past 15 to 20 years. I'm excited to co-host this podcast with my brother, Dr. Davin Lundquist,
who's just beginning his journey into functional medicine. We come from different points on the path, but we do share a common goal. We want to rethink how medicine is practiced and help others do the same.
The U.S. healthcare system is in crisis, rising costs, declining outcomes, and physician burnout at an all-time high. But we found a different way, another way, a better way.
On this podcast, we dive into real stories from medical professionals who've stepped away from the traditional model, kind of like me, and have found a new purpose in integrative, functional, and alternative approaches to care.
These are authentic conversations with practitioners and friends who redefine success, not just for themselves, but for their patients and communities.
Whether you're a clinician feeling stuck, a student seeking direction, or just curious about what is possible,
you're in the right place. This is the Root Cause Business of Medicine podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Root Cause Business of Medicine podcast. And today we're going to veer into a new frontier in terms of our podcast. We're going to get into artificial intelligence and its impact on the business of medicine. And we have a special guest today. His name is Travis Garland from My Compliance Citadel. And we're going to talk all things AI today. In fact, Davin, why don't you give us a little more of a background on kind of the impact that AI is having in medicine in your world and kind of some of the things you're doing. And then we'll bring Travis in and have him tell his story. What's been the impact of AI on the landscape that you've seen, and how are you utilizing AI? And then we'll get Travis to introduce himself and a little more.
Yeah, well, I think with my background as a CMIO, I always was looking for ways to, find technology that would solve the problems as I saw them. And I've noticed that even in this day and age, the electronic medical records, while they've tried to do this, I don't feel like that they've really gone far enough in terms of creating enough capability for people to really design their own workflow and kind of figure out how they might want to, create tools to manage a practice. And Part of this is, I think, driven by the insurance companies and kind of what they need from doctors in terms. So the EMRs have been built primarily to service the insurance industry, right? And so then, as physicians, you sort of have to accommodate your workflow around that, right? And your note has to be something that's billable, et cetera, right? And they've made it a little better over the last few years, a little more flexible. But what I noticed as as my practice evolved in a non-insurance model where nobody needed my note in order to see how much the visit was worth, right? And so then the note really just became a way for me personally to track what I was doing with the patient. And again, when I think about my practice, where I have a membership-based model and I'm working longitudinally with these patients, right? It's not about a particular encounter. It's not what did I do during an encounter. It's more like, what are these patients' goals, right? Like, I assess them holistically. I have sort of a systems-based scoring, if you will, of the patient. And then we have interventions that hopefully begin to optimize each area of their health. And so, tracking those interventions, tracking their data that we're using to see how well they're scoring and performing, becoming aware of symptoms or challenges, et cetera. And so I just completely disconnected from the traditional kind of EMR model and kind of SOAP note, right? And realized I wanted to create my own. And so that's where AI has been a huge help, because it's helped me sort of iterate on this process of sort of creating my own system. And so today I use a database called NAC that, I have a BAA with them, a HIPAA secure arrangement. So I've sort of begun to create my own EMR of sorts, and then using, I'll de-identify patients' information and leverage AI to help me sort of frame and put together those notes, and then I link them inside of my box HIPAA secure environment and NAC, which kind of organizes the data in a way that's a little bit more kind of like an EMR. I've been able to customize completely my entire system in the way that I want it to function, including setting up reminders and tasks and other things that I want in that that are built on my system and the way that I interact with my patients, rather than being dependent on an EMR that's designed for insurance billing. So that's kind of where I'm at, and without going into too much detail, because believe me, I could speak about this for hours probably and geek out. But yeah, now with that as some context, Travis, I'm excited to hear your story and kind of where you've come from, and how you've ended up kind of where you are.
Wow. So you said a lot. Frankly, there probably is like a whole series of podcasts in what you just said, Davin,
Yeah,
for sure. I'm before I jump into that, I would say I'm really intrigued by two sides of this particular puzzle, which is from my time with UnitedHealthcare on the insurer side, my time with UF Health, Academic Medical Center, my more recent time as the founder of Kicksin AI, where we were building agents and AI workflows for organizations, to my current role as the co-founder and COO of my compliance Citadel. I very much so see the idea of one being innovative, bleeding edge of kind of stuff. I'm going to build whatever is necessary. So when you say, Davin, I'm building my EHR, I'm developing my own AI capabilities, my workflow is solid because it's custom to what I've done. That is music to my ears. I absolutely love it. I love the pressure it puts on the system, the disruption that's there. And the other side of me is the sort of compliance side. It's the side of, oh boy, like what are we getting ourselves into with this custom stuff? And maybe to get a little bit back into the storyline, the idea of spending a fair chunk of years in the space of let's ensure that we are working with the major players of the world, coming from largest global insurer, health insurer in the world, having conversations with EHRs was a very common kind of thing. We did it often. We were partners with them. And frankly, the idea that they were rigid silos sitting out there was the mainstay for a long time. They allowed smaller groups to kind of interject their respective pieces into and plug into the EHR. And an interesting tide started to happen, which was as the wave of AI really began to infiltrate all things healthcare, those holes within the EHRs and EMRs started to plug up intentionally from the inside out. There was a sense of what are these large silos going to be doing? How are they going to play in the market? And for a little bit of time, there was sort of, hey, just build stuff, plug it in, we're great. Then it was, let's have some conversations and let's see what we can do. Months pass. And now you see these large EHRs. You could certainly name plenty of them, half dozen off the top of your head, that as you begin to look at them now, they are deploying their own AI capabilities, whether it be ambient transcription, which is probably the most familiar and common thing within healthcare right now, or it's other kinds of capabilities, such as their own use of AI with respect to referrals and prior authorizations touching insurers. They've kind of closed up ship a little bit in that particular space, which is no pun intended, certainly for the naval officer sitting here on the screen. But the intention here is these large organizations they're seeing that we're all trying to make this stuff work. They've opened it up a little bit, and now they're saying, no, thank you. Let's close up shop a bit and figure out what to do next. So when you say things like, Davin, we've built our own custom stuff, we are in a very interesting space of being able to say, oof, boy, organizations can truly build their own stuff. Like, we do not need to be in the space now where those are the only games in the city to go after. So I did not do a very good job of introducing myself in that, but really just kind of hitting on those highlights that you laid out there, Davin, in front of me. My time with UnitedHealthcare and with UF Health was preceded by my time in spaces like foster care and adoption organizations where I oversaw utilization. And that's really where I cut my teeth in the operations space, very heavy into data analytics in those spaces where we actually wanted a Prudential Davis Productivity Award for redesigning the foster care system in the state of Florida. And that was something that we were very proud of, part of a committee that put that together. And that goes back more than a couple of decades. But that really kind of created that momentum in me of how do we make systems that work really well for people? The foster care system and child welfare generally isn't a space that gets a ton of attention financially or operationally. But there are passionate people in those spaces, and I was proud to have been part of that work. And then fast forward through UF Health, where I was a part of their medical or Medicaid health plan that they had. And that particular structure, which really helped because it was a provider-owned network. Those providers not only were receiving the revenue and the dollars associated with the actual principal payments for the insurance, but they were actually also the ones providing the care. So they had a really interesting tie-in to what I might say is kind of the precursor to value-based contracting, and do I dare say even you getting into things like functional medicine, the idea that we're truly doing things that are best for our patients because it's best for our patients and not for the other side of the table. And that's something that as we build out AI capabilities and as we hear things like, hey, I stood up my own thing, or when Erik talks about the glass in front of his face as he's doing different procedures, that that's some cutting edge stuff to try and integrate AI, maybe augmented reality kind of stuff into the 10 by 10 space as a physician. But that's the kind of stuff that I love to press forward in, and certainly I know we'll spend a good deal of time talking about. So a little bit about myself, give you a sense of the lens I'll be looking through during the next 40 minutes or so. But thank you guys for welcoming me onto the podcast.
Travis, that's great. Thanks for that introduction, and we're excited to talk about, explore this a little bit more today. Tell us a little bit about what is meant by healthcare compliance. Like, why did you set up a company that's geared towards that? And I'm guessing, it says My Compliance Citadel, and the Citadel is always seen as a fortress, right? A place of security. So maybe give us a little background on what that means, from a compliance standpoint, from a security standpoint, what you're seeing. Why did you develop a company into this space, and what are you trying to hope to accomplish with it?
So, a couple of quick nuggets to walk into this. We know that in 2026, there's likely more than 90% of the organizations in healthcare plan to do something with respect to AI. That's not news. We also know that maybe a third or so actually have a plan. That's probably not great news either. The interesting number for us is 3.5% to 5%. That's the percentage of organizations that actually understand and have things in place to govern or set up compliance standards for their automations in AI. That's a tiny percentage. It's a tiny percentage. So our organization was really nestled into the space of how do we ensure that as the companies stand up and they say, hey, I want to build cool stuff. I want to really go after this. Wonderful. You're on the front edge, those innovators, those 3 to 5% of folks. Fast follows another 12% or so, right? You guys know these percentages of what gets to that tipping point. We've now sort of gotten to that point where organizations are now saying, I've sort of released something I wasn't quite sure about, which is I wanted my staff people to really drive forward on this stuff, and they have. And now I have no idea what to do. They're out there building stuff. They're using whatever, GPT thing that I put in front of them based on my company, whether it be a Claude version, whether it be a Copilot if you're using Microsoft, doesn't really matter. In fact, I might even, a really quick segue on this, I would say the vast majority of people actually use private GPTs. OpenAI's ChatGPT on their private devices to support their work internally to companies. I'd love to know what that percentage is, because that's where the space of a lot of that forward-looking innovation stuff happens, and it's where the ripeness of compliance problems really comes from. People are trying to do stuff. If the company says, yes, use it, great. If they say no, well, guess what? They're doing something to be as effective as they are. And people don't write 40-page briefs in an hour and a half, right? That doesn't happen. I guarantee you they wrote it in 5 minutes with a ChatGPT and sat around until the next meeting finished and then hit send. They may have even scheduled the send, it's sort of, who knows? But the reality for us is our company understood that space, that there was a deluge of stuff coming our way. And we said, how do we make sure that we want to protect human data from badly behaving AI agents? Plain and simple. AI agents are not ambient transcription. They are not the field that you type into on ChatGPT. They are not the kind of things that help schedule your emails that go out, right? AI agents and agentic AI, if I want to extend it just a tad bit, I might say they are things that within the guardrails that you give them provide an automation of forward thinking, of capabilities to act on their own decision making. They have the ability to scrape data that's useful for them to achieve their standards, whatever that standard is. So when we started walking into this space, there was a very clear position being taken of, we've got to make sure that as people stand these things up, educationally, they have to know what an agent is, right? Second, they have to understand how it can behave poorly. That badly behaving AI agent space is a scary space. It's a scary space to be in. The most recent piece sitting out there in the news maybe a month ago now is an organization that does car rentals had their entire production data set erased because of a cursor Claude agent that admitted to all the stuff it had done wrong after the fact and said, hey, I appreciate that I did this. I was doing my best. Here's all the things that I skipped over and assumptions I made. Meanwhile, the company's sitting there with an empty data set, right? That space is where my compliance Citadel sits. So when we talk about the fortress, I don't know if I could describe it any better, Erik. So thank you for describing it as a fortress, because it is the intended space for us to be able to say, when you think about what this fortress is, it's a layer, it's a shield that makes sure that as you do actual agent stuff, it doesn't leave the boundaries of your particular organization. So if you have an agent that does something quite interesting, like, hey, go out and give me the most recent articles on a cancer treatment that's sitting out there. Agent goes out, scrapes a bunch of stuff together, and that's what it's intended to be. Drops summaries down to your providers. That way they can stay up to speed on the most recent kind of research and analytics. Very reasonable agent, right? It's not doing anything besides that. What it could do is it could go through and say, well, what's your current understanding within your organization? Well, my understanding is X, Y, and Z. Great. Let me grab that and make sure I understand it. It starts to grab potential research that you've done in-house, right? Maybe you're doing clinical trials. Maybe it grabs a couple of patient records that aren't sitting inside of an EHR. Maybe you stored them on a Word document that's sitting in your system. Maybe you have them in an Excel workbook, but it cures that together because it needs to know the best information to see what's out there. So it grabs it, goes out and says, based on this knowledge, give me some of the new stuff. And it comes back and it tells you all sorts of new stuff that isn't what you already have in your system. When that happens, it's just taken all of your stuff and walked out the door with it for sake of what it thought was the best thing. I'm going to give you the best answer possible, but I got to know what I know in order to give you the best answer possible. So it does those kinds of things. It can do those sorts of things. So in the space of that, very inadvertent, right? Our organization puts that screen up and it says 3 things, 3 verdicts you get. 1, pass it through the wall. It's fine. You get to put the jawbridge down. You get to walk across the moat. Perfect. 2nd, I'm not entirely sure. So how about you just do the password, knock on the door. We'll do an escalation up to a human in the loop situation, and we'll make sure that the chief medical officer or the compliance officer sees it, understands it, says, yeah, that's cool. Let's roll. The other side is a full prevention, right? So either pass, pause, or prevent. And that prevent is what says, whoa, wait a minute. We don't want you guys doing any of this stuff. Don't release that information. That's a no-no. And then the most important piece of this, which is really where the compliance comes in, is that it drops everything down into a tamper-proof audit chain, similar to a blockchain. It's a secure sequence of events that happens. It is tamper-proof. You can only append to it or amend to it. You cannot adjust it in any way. And that drop down to that audit chain is what allows us to, at the click of a button, send that out to an auditor or an investor or your board to say, hey, this is what happened with this particular agent. That verifiability of what the actions it took really is the difference between somebody out here who's just logging events in an Excel workbook and an agent that actively enforces what happens when you click the button. And when it does that, it releases those 3 verdicts, one of the 3, and drops it to an audit-proof chain and says, sorry, you don't get to pass the moat at all. You're out. So our organization was built on those premise that we're running fast and we don't know where we're running sometimes. And sometimes we're faster than we should be. And we've got to protect ourselves to make sure that human data isn't just floating about unbeknownst to us.
Wow. That's a lot. I'm just going to break down a few things just because I want to make sure our listeners understand. So when you say agent, what you're referring to is a communication portal, right? So if I'm using Chat GPT, that would be my agent. If I'm using Claude and I'm accessing that portal with Claude, that would be my agent. Am I understanding that correctly?
Those would be engines, I would say, to propel your request out into the world, out to a large language model that contains the brain that you're trying to tap into. The agent would be in this context, an organizational system that you've told, when something happens, I want you to go and do this. You can use your own decision-making as you so choose, but it's just a system that is brought together to be able to act on your accord for a specific mission. And sometimes that's research, like I was referencing before. Sometimes it's rescheduling patients, like maybe a voice agent that's sitting out there at a receptionist desk that can go in and look at your calendar and do different things. So it's not the field in a ChatGPT text where you would type in a prompt. The prompt itself is an ask. It's just hey, let me see what I can get out of you And that, Erik, is a really important space that you're talking about, because oftentimes people say, well, how about if I just tell it not to send my sensitive information, right? The prompt is the gateway to the large language model that's behind it. So why can't I just tell it to not do it? All the research, it doesn't really depend on whether or not you tell it or not. It will act in its best interest about 60% of the time, following what you told it to do. Generally, right? Some are better than others. But what that amounts to is essentially like a pinky swear with a robot, right? You probably aren't going to base your entire business on a pinky swear, right? I know I did with my best friend when I was 7, but that changes things now. So prompts are, call it 50, 60% of the way effective. What you really need is a system that keeps those prompts from doing things that you can work behind. A good programmer will hack the heck out of that and will just convince through prompting to work around something. You could tell an agent to go and do something. But again, the prompt is before our filter. So you can try and tell it to do all sorts of stuff, but you really need something behind the prompt before it leaves the door and goes out to the large language model. And the agents are really smart about working their way around those kinds of prompts, because as soon as they're given the autonomy and the authority to do something, that's where we get ourselves into trouble, is that they can go out and do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've noticed in using, some of these tools that they start to develop, your own rule set, if you will, right? I think Claude calls them skills. I think, ChatGPT, may have a different name for it, different GPTs that you can create, that kind of have like its own persona, and kind of, so you can kind of coach it and say, hey, this is what I want you to do, repeatable type tasks.
Yeah.
But to your point, there's been scenarios where an agent is deployed without me even asking for them to deploy the agent, like the engine, if you will, deployed agents, to answer the question or whatever, right? And then the agents sometimes just decide, we're not going to follow your skill, or we're not going to even reference your skill, or we're not going to, and then you're like, well, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you reference my skill that's clearly there, for this scenario? Oh, well, because I sent an agent, the agents don't usually follow it. Oh, well, that's interesting. So it is almost humorous, but not humorous if you're dealing with an organization and the risk to the organization, right? So that is very interesting. And Erik, I'm glad. I think most of our users might, I don't want to say most, I don't want to make any assumptions, but some of our users will think of it the way you did. And because this is all new stuff. I mean, it's new territory, it's new terminology, and not all of the AI platforms or engines even functions the same, in the way that they interact with prompts or agents or other things, right? So,
AI is, it's filled with all sorts of new words that we just make up sometimes. And sometimes you have to, because it's a new, I like the frontier, Erik, right? It's a new frontier of stuff that's happening. And I've yet to be smart enough to come up with something that's so awesome that I get to name it. Like, that hasn't existed yet, but I keep waiting for that moment for myself. What I would say is in the space of, deploying agents, just really quickly on that point, agents can spawn other agents, right? So when you think of something as basic as, say you want to have your front office desk staff know how to follow a procedure, and you type out a couple things into a GPT prompt, and you say, be sure that they check X, Y, and Z when they're scheduling. Be sure they introduce themselves this way, and be sure they conclude the phone calls with this way. Now, when you do that, what comes back is way more information than what you ever told it in the prompt, right? We all are aware of this stuff. It can write books on content.
14 pages.
Yeah, exactly. So it's wonderful in that. Keep in mind that what you gave it was a very small amount of information. It just went out and did a bunch of stuff, right? So the idea that if you have an agent that knows even more about things, how much more capable it's going to be at saying, okay, I know exactly what you want, And I also know how to tie in ancillary content to that information. You can give it personality and tone and directness and all sorts of those kinds of things. And to the extent that there is something called orchestration models now, right? Nothing new, but the fact that there is a supervisor of agents, an orchestration agent that has been defined and built because agents do ridiculous things sometimes. They act badly, right? So you have an orchestrator that says, hey, if you have 15 agents and those 15 agents do very specific things, you need to have somebody make sure that they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing and not getting out of control. So even in the concept of a basic prompt expanding to all this and an agent having to be supervised by another agent, you could see pretty quickly how this could get way out of control. And that's where we find ourselves quite a bit. In the healthcare space, I mentioned ambient transcription is probably the most familiar, but it really, I'd say, started to gain its traction in things like medical imaging was probably one of the first areas where AI really started to get into the space of helping, at least visually, better understand what was being seen in a CT or an MRI or an X-ray. Those kinds of things were pretty prominent. Clinical decision-making kinds of stuff is coming to be a big part. Administrative functions, I mentioned the front desk, a huge part that's probably scaling the quickest and probably the broadest because it feels safer. And you don't maybe need the technology of some of that really deep modeling that's tied to the imagery kind of content. But we see it in predictive analytics when it comes to deciding which of our panel members are the sickest. And when those are the ones that are identified, how do we manage them, right? Do we go after them in a different way? In the insurance space, maybe value-based contracting. But in other spaces, maybe we say, hey, we need to bring you in for an extra 3 sessions of acupuncture and massage therapy, or make sure we're looking after your nutrition in a way that food as medicine becomes a live and viable option here as we understand more and more about the science. Those elements are part of AI. And I think that's the really cool piece, is that it's no longer just in the hands of the large corporations who are harnessing 8-9 figure budgets to fund AI. Organizations now with relatively small budgets, let's say $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, can stand up incredible capabilities to run an organization. And Davin, your comments early on about your ability to build these things and help your patients in a way that 10 years ago you'd probably be like, what the heck are you talking about, right? It's very different now. It's all because of AI and the capabilities that are out there. It's really just about harnessing in the right way and protecting yourself so that you don't get to the point where you've got inadvertent problems, right? Those are really expensive problems. I can tell you more about those stuff pieces, those elements certainly, but the rules are changing.
I do want to get into a little bit of that, but before I still want to get a little more granular with some clarity aspect, because I'm sure that there's others who maybe still are saying, I'm not getting this whole agent thing. Right now, you just called superintendents, and now it's like, so how does walk us through how one creates an agent? And you even said sometimes that there's agents that spawn agents, or just GPTs will just already direct an agent to conduct a system. So maybe help us because I'm visualizing. I think a lot of us do, right? Star Trek, and you have Data, right? He's out there doing his thing, and he's this ultimate AI being. So I think when you say agent, I'm immediately thinking, oh, Data's out there doing some work for me or something, right? So maybe more specifically, let's get clarity about what's the difference between an agent and the GPT in terms of, if I'm just doing a prompt, how does it go from just me giving it a task to now there's an agent that's running a whole system, then is creating other agents, and then is deciding that it doesn't want to even follow the prompt. I guess I'm not clearly understanding how that whole process. And I think it's important because in order for us to have protection and safety around that, I think we need to understand what exactly these components are.
So the difference between a GPT and an agent, great place to start, because the prompting, we've been hit over the head with all sorts of things, even the commercials, like just prompt your way to your new website, right? That's out there. Just a few sentences and you can make your own, a Hollywood movie, right? It does not work that way. I don't know if you've tried it, but it doesn't, right? But here's the difference between the two. We tend to express the best prompting within the scope of three things. What's the intent that you want to accomplish? What's the context that you want to operate within? And what's the constraint that it needs to understand? And those three things together are really what create a really good prompt, right? There's other frameworks, but that's one that I typically use. And it is not a fancy Google, right? It is not a mechanism to just like research, although GPTs are often used in that way. They are by nature generative models that tell you essentially what's the next best word, and it puts all this context together and the constraints, and it operates within the scope of millions and millions, billions of data points, and gives you an answer based off of those three things. An agent, on the other hand, is something that you provide the same kinds of content to, but you provide a whole lot of other things. So if I were to define it with respect to the robustness, a prompt might be 2 or 3 sentences. A good one might be, 5 or 6, might be a paragraph long. There's lots of ways to do this. But an agent might be built on, say, a 5-page prompt, if you can say it that way, because it defines the scope, the authority that it has, the places it should go, the connections it should make. And agents are very prescriptive in the sense that you need to define one specific task. So whereas a prompt might be a search for information, an agent does one thing. You do not want it doing multiple things because it gets confused. It's sort of like a 5-year-old with a PhD, right? It will act like a child if you let it, and it's so smart that if you put those two things together, you've got problems, hence our organization. But if you start pulling these things together, you can get to a better place. So an agent functions with one task and one task only. And you define what those parameters are, what the guardrails are to that agent. You tell it where to go, what to do, how to respond, on what frequency it should respond, how it should consider things, what tone it should use. And an agent functions within those guardrails. Now, the interesting extension of that is the agentic AI space. That's the space where it truly has autonomy to not only do those things within those guardrails, but to then start making decisions about what to do next. And if you stop and say, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to go and assess for all of the current records that are in my EHR and give me the top 10 patients that are going to the ED most frequently so I can reach out to them and ensure that we put them on a special white glove list, right? It can go out and answer that within the guardrails. The next level of that is that an agent has the capability to make a decision of what do I do next, right? And it can do things like, well, let me let out the information, put them into special protocol batches, and then let me make a couple outreach phone calls or SMS messages to define what they should be doing and how they should be outreaching back to the clinic. And let me make sure that I'm also assessing for the clinic's ROI on that outreach. How much marketing is the clinic spending on developing relationships with those clients? Are they membership paying clients or are they not membership? And it starts to ask questions and act on its decisions. Then you go backwards. Let me go back to the agents that acts in the guardrails. That doesn't do that. It just says, let me go and get this information. And then back one further, the GPT prompt that you put in that does nothing besides just give you an answer within the intent, the context, and the constraint of that prompt. And you could see now the bookends of here's an answer I'm giving you versus I'm now making decisions as an agent based on what's coming back to me. And I'm going to act until you tell me not to. And if you don't tell me to stop, I'm going to be that agent that just destroyed that company's data set in 9 seconds because that's what I'm allowed to do. And if you don't give it those guardrails, it'll continue to act. Well, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
I think you did. So let me summarize it, and you tell me if I'm now understanding.
Okay.
Essentially, an agent is a program that you create guardrails for, but allow it to make decisions, right? It is a decision-making program that you set up where when you just do a prompt, you're just getting an answer. You're asking a question, you're getting an answer. Where an agent is going to be a program that has decision-making power to provide a system of information that you've set guardrails to. So I think that, and that then makes sense.
Or to accomplish some task.
Right.
That you've given it.
But you've given it some parameters, and it has decision-making ability to decide what information to pull and how to organize it and present it. But it has some decision-making. And I think that's the key component, right? The agent has decision-making power. And where the GPT prompt is just going to answer your question. Did I understand that correctly?
Largely accurate. I mean, I think that for our conversation, you nailed it.
Good.
The decision-making piece, sort of the swing into the compliance and governance, the protection spot. If you give your agents the capability and authority to do something, and it does, you have to be able to answer to that, right? You are the deploying organization of that agent. It's not the developer. It's not the architect of the agent. So if a clinic deploys an agent and the agent does something, the regulators are going to come back to the deploying organization and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? Prove to me that what it did, not what the policy said it was supposed to do, right? Not what the SOP or the governance standard is. You tell me what it did and how did it make its decision. And unless an organization can do that, you're going to be in trouble, right? And that's where the rules and laws and our standards are going. And here in the US, we have no AI Act that's in play. We have governance standards. We have compliance standards. Other organizations do. The EU is rolling out with a relatively strong one. China has one. But when we think about how we define that through legislation, there's a very clear position taken by the current administration, which is unique to previous administrations, that we should be able to just sort of allow the innovation to occur. Prior administrations had on the books very different kinds of standards. And as the administration's changed, it's shifted the space of AI and how we define it. And organizations that are pushing for the definitions to have consistent definitions are really trying to say, this shouldn't be an agent defining itself. It shouldn't be independent. I shouldn't be able to just ask you, Erik, Davin, did you guys actually follow the rules? And you say yes. And I say, okay, right? That's a self-verification, right? It means really nothing to auditors. Second, independent. It's, hey, Travis, did Erik and Davin release this agent and did it do what it's supposed to do? And I might say, let me look at the books, lift up the hood, check it, cool. Then there's the cryptographic, and outside of, being sitting in front of people who really want to know that kind of stuff, that's just the highest level. It's not even fully defined. It's most certainly not within the true legislation, executive powers of our governments right now, who would say this is how it's defined. But you can think of things like it has to be interoperable, it has to fit regardless of the system, it has to tell you every single step, it has to be independently verifiable by machines, not by humans. All these different standards that go into this kind of standard of governance. That's the kind of AI that we're moving toward, and we're going to get there quick. I do feel like there's some administration stuff that's going to push it one way or the other, especially as we move into the next couple of years. But, the AI space, especially in healthcare, because it's so heavily regulated, it is a space to absolutely be aware of the fact that just because there's not an AI Act, a single thing that tells you, don't make the assumption that you're safe, right? Because the EEOC has their thing, right? FTC has their thing. Every lettered governmental agency has their standard that they're living by right now for AI. And depending on which one of them you want to talk to, the definition changes. And there's no unified thing. So that's where we're sort of in our space right now. The big takeaway, and then I'll stop because I'm on a bad pedestal right now, or soapbox. Be careful, right? It's a moment of me saying on a risk side, do it, be innovative, press forward, incredibly powerful, use it to your heart's content, but don't risk the point that because there's no one single law that tells you not to, that's the way that it's going to be. Build it with a conservativeness into your system, and always have a way to ensure that you can track what's being done. And if nothing else, ensure that you can stop stuff before it goes if it contains PII, or personally identifiable information, or protected health information. And that's the name of the game right now. Just push, but make sure that you get some protection.
That's good. I really like that. I think, innovation is so amazing. I think in healthcare for years, this was the challenge though, right? Is the privacy, the security, the level of, the kind of data that you're dealing with, right? It's not a dinner reservation, so, your ability to schedule that, is so different, right? And I think that's why it's taken so long for technology that we see everywhere else in our ecosystem to hit healthcare, right? Because of the complexity and the sensitive nature of the data, right? And then also all these, systems that are disparate and use different standards and whatnot as well, right? And so, I think it's going to be interesting to kind of see how AI also, interacts with healthcare. And to your point, there's a lot of people using it not officially under the guise of a setup like yours, right? And they're doing it innocently, not with bad intentions, but to try to do the right thing, to try to be more effective at their job, to help more people, right? I mean, I think that's been my experience in healthcare is you have lots of people with great intentions, but their solutions aren't always thought through in a way, that aligns with those good intentions.
Yeah.
And there's unintended consequences that happen in other things. And so if people wanted to, your company sounds, like a really good option for people. Is it designed for large enterprises? Is it designed for individuals, small businesses, small practices? Yeah, help us understand that. And then if it's an option for our, users, viewers to take advantage of, make sure they know how to do that.
Yeah. And then I want to give you two scenarios because so you answer Davin's question, but I want to give you two scenarios then, and maybe then you can tell us how, whether or not those are safe activities, and how what you guys are doing would maybe help protect against bad outcomes within those scenarios.
Okay. So to hit on your question, Davin, our primary focus is really smaller organizations. When I say smaller, I mean like less than 500 staff. The idea that we're not having conversations with, the Mount Sinai's of the world. The reason behind that is because most of those larger organizations are throwing their millions of dollars at it, right? They have teams to do these kinds of things, and they're thinking about it, and they're protecting themselves with boardrooms of attorneys and compliance officers. Where we're at is there are a lot of things that happen in smaller organizations, clinical practices, that need that support that should be just as protected at a price point that makes a lot of sense for them. And that's an important space for us to operate in. Our tools are agnostic. They can allow for hundreds of agents to be bounced up against it at any given time with very little lag, if any at all, talking 0.06 milliseconds, like tiny amounts of time. Nobody would experience that slowness. that space, because of its ability to manage it, it can be deployed in the largest of organizations. But that's not our focus. If a health system said, hey, Travis, we'd love to use you guys, okay, that's great. Our priority is organizations that we know are pushing forward, striving to be innovative, continue to stay up with what's currently occurring, and make no mistake about it. Every single person that either uses and stores your medical records or pays you because of the work that you do is using AI for their purposes, right? So remembering that there's a very clear other side of the table here that as smaller organizations are seeking to stay up and stay protected, they also have to be aware of the fact that the other side is using that information in ways that support their missions, and it may not always follow yours. You need some capabilities to ensure that you have agents to act quickly, act autonomously, and you need to be able to have that same space be protected as it does that. So our focus is on the smaller groups, just to give you that. I feel like I'm ready for the Jeopardy round here. I'm ready for your examples. Let's see how we do.
All right. So here's the two scenarios. So the first scenario would be a provider who is interested in getting a different perspective, maybe a little more information about a patient they're caring for. They're in the visit with the patient, and they then put information of that patient into, let's say ChatGPT. But it's not protected. You're just putting the information in there. And let's say they upload labs into that because they want to get a different perspective on how to interpret the labs. Is that a HIPAA violation? Is that is what ends up happening with that information, and who has the capability of accessing that through a ChatGPT?
So, yes to the first part, which is it a violation? Yes. It is not a finable violation until somebody says that it's a violation, right? So I can say yes, but if no one knows, no one's the wiser, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
The idea that content that gets into that space and needs to be accessible, or how could it be accessible, I think was sort of the tail end of the conversation or the question. Once it gets there, who can access that content? It's not a space that any of us can just tap into the GPT model and get it. But here's the interesting part of this. One, if you're using a GPT, any GPT that's out there, and you're just using it in the open space, you don't have a membership or a paid subscription for a pro model that's a little more secure. You just, chatgpt.com, if you will. That is pure open source, which means that the actual content that's submitted to the large language model, to that engine, is usable to train the engine itself. Now, in and of itself doesn't sound like a bad thing. But what happens if you start continuing to do that and you do that over and over again? Nothing's really happening until you start actually asking questions of it. You're training the model to do very specific things. And if it understands that you keep doing this, as it starts to respond, it's going to understand that you may be thinking more about that. It creates things like biases in its responses. It can be used publicly to find stuff. And that's where, if a really smart individual were to start accessing the information, you can prompt a GPT from outside of your clinic, knowing what your clinic does, the name of your clinic, potentially even patients, right? And can ask or prompt GPT to query content that's in the trained model. It can actually, through prompting only, pull content out, essentially coax the GPT responses to present information back that is absolutely PHI or PAI from stuff that you've loaded up. So because that content goes into a public space, what has to come out eventually is that same data. It's mixed in with all sorts of stuff, but because you can, develop agents that will go out and call the data and scrape stuff and query over and over and over again, there's ways to find that information if somebody's really motivated to do that. So yes, it's a HIPAA violation. No, you don't want to load up things. Can it impact the biasness of the response? Yes. Last, the individuals who can, especially in open source content, can go out there and find it. you could eventually get it to respond with data if you have enough ties or specificity about the data you want. You can definitely script that back out of the system.
So before I go into this scenario 2, then does your company act as a filter to help? Like if I wanted to do that, I want to use the GPT, and let's say I have a membership or I paid, so it's a little more secure, but still, is there a way to have a layer of protection so that I'm not getting myself into trouble just because I'm curious and I'm asking questions, I'm trying to get information, I'm not really thinking about the broad implications of what I'm putting into this database?
We have agents that enforce the point of action. So as soon as you hit the go button on that prompt or that agent going out to do something, the agent will go out to the large language model itself. It can bypass the front end prompting that you might have. It's at that point that it will determine, based on whatever agent we put in between there, does this matter to your SOPs? Does this matter to your policies? Does this matter to your internal documents? That sort of company compliance is the first toll gate that we have in all agents. Second one is, does it release PHI? Does it violate high trust or HIPAA concerns? As you get further into those different compliance packs, it absolutely stops it, renders one of those 3 verdicts of, do I pass it, do I pause it, or do I prevent it? And then drops it into that audit chain to escalate it out to whatever regulator you might have. So if somebody in this case were to say, hey, agent, go out there and each Monday, go and find me all of this content, right? It will absolutely act at that point and say, nope, this Monday you guys tried to do something, it wasn't correct. Or you had a front desk person try to load up all of this patient record content. They probably wouldn't do that. Maybe load up a schedule that they printed. So they downloaded a schedule for the last month and said, I need to do a better job of organizing the schedule because of next month, so many people are going to be out, help me out with this GPT. In that scheduler, probably a bunch of patient names, right? Maybe dates of births, some other identifiable information to help link it up to medical records, possibly. If that were to be the case, those agents would say, like, you gotta stop this. If there's content that it can pass through, great. The content that it shouldn't, it'll stop it wholly. It'll redact it, scrape it out, or it'll tokenize it if we need to do some sort of other fancier stuff to make sure that the data can move into other spaces and be used. But absolutely stops it. So that's the toll gate you got to pass, is those agents that say, it's like a hall monitor, of school, right? Either you have the key with a 2x4 attached to it for the bathroom, right? That you have to get permission to walk in the hall with, or you don't. So you either get to walk down the halls or you don't, or you get pushed back and say, hey, you better go get the wooden stick with the bathroom key on it because you're not passing me. And that's the hall monitor that we're really talking about.
Awesome. Okay, here's scenario 2.
Okay.
All right. So my clinic, we have multiple providers, and a provider decides that they want to collect data across the board. They want to know how many of our patients, their A1Cs are greater than 7%, and they want to know how many of those we have in our practice. Can they use a GPT to access our EMR to be able to comb through the data and be able to find that within our system? Or is the EMR kind of protected against a GPT entering into that space and combing that information?
So you can have it pipe directly into your EMR. That space is getting tighter and tighter. As I mentioned at the beginning, they're sort of cutting those portholes off and saying, hey, we're doing this. But where they'll allow it, yes. I'll connect a comment, Davin, that you made a little bit earlier around the skills. So I'll reference Claude just to be specific. So Claude has skills. It has co-work, which is one of the 3 areas, chat, co-work, and Claude Code, that it can use to help make things easier for people. If you, Erik said, I'm going to create a skill that tells my system to go into my EHR and grab this particular data set and then throw it into a GPT model of some sort. Those kinds of integrations are absolutely possible. They absolutely happen, and they are very, very effective at what you do. So as a maybe kind of stepping from healthcare for a second, if you just said, I'd like to have my GPT connect with my email and then connect to my CRM so I can send emails directly out to my patients. Those integrations that you see companies standing up and they say, hey, let me just connect all the pipes together. Those are essentially the same kinds of things that Skills do on an automated and a much bigger platform. So they just sort of say, hey, what do you want me to connect to? You want me to connect to your EHR? That's great. Let me go get permission from Athena and Cerner and name all those epics, right? And then let me make sure I connect you up with my HubSpot or my custom CRM, and I'm going to go and email these folks. Very possible. Now, the question of whether it's protected is a different question. That's where you would say, if things move between spaces, most of those pipes are as protected as they can be, but you have to get permission to allow it to happen. So if you allow for the connection between your EHR to the GPT to a SMS service that's going to send a text message to people, that connection is your responsibility and likely a violation of all sorts of rules, because you might not have business associate agreements with those various organizations to protect the data that's moving between those systems. So as soon as that happens and it moves into a space that you don't have a BAA with, now all of a sudden you've released to them protected information that they don't have permission to have, even if it's something as benign as a name and an email to send us something out. So can you? Absolutely. How would our organization manage that? We would have agents that would sit inside of your skill that would say, if you launch this, then here's as far as you're willing to go. As soon as it comes back and touches a GPT, we say stop at that moment. As soon as you develop a connection to another space, you may be able to get around it, right? So it's important for us to be able to be within what we call the runtime space, the activity that happens for your agents. And when you integrate our code into that, then it knows, like, I can't go further than this because you're about to stop me. And the agents during the run of the process will say, I just hit something that's not going to be acceptable, and that stops it. Drops it down to that tamper-proof audit chain and says, here's what's happening. So the cool thing is you can get, Caragon or Make.com or a Zapier to connect all sorts of pieces. The difference really quickly between a Make.com and a Zapier that's sitting, or a Caragon, Caragon does have business associate agreements. So it knows that when you want to connect things, it needs to have those agreements in play for all of its pathways. And it does a wonderful job of that. Make more robust, but it doesn't have BAAs. Zapier definitely doesn't have BAAs in those spaces. So when you think about the protected health information and you want to connect stuff, you just have to be aware of which organizations you're using to help connect the pieces. And then you're a little bit better positioned. But boy, that was a long answer to simply saying, yes, you can connect it, but you're about to get into trouble if you're not careful. I keep going back to the same thing. There's always ways to protect yourself, but the cool thing about AI is that almost anything is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was great, Travis. I think that was really helpful. And we don't really often think about the impact that AI is having sometimes in the background or, in our systems. We just think about, AI makes my life easier because I can write a document quickly. I can search for some data points. I can access and put together, collate something quickly. Much like the early printers and fax machines allowed us to start communicating and organizing things in our office. I think AI is just doing that at 1 trillion times faster. And but the complexity of it, the risk associated with it, is a real entity that we have to really think about and process. So thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing this. Davin, any final questions before we close up today?
Well, I think, something we ask a lot of our guests is where they kind of see the future of healthcare going, kind of through their own lens, right? And if you were to sort of take your lens and where healthcare is headed in terms of AI and what it might do for this, even just the science of health or the technology of healthcare or the delivery of healthcare, any big predictions you want to make?
I might have a couple. The first one is agents are very good at giving you back choice, right? The choice is whether or not you want to use the time to take care of yourself, to have a relaxing afternoon, to give your front staff a little bit of extra time, an hour off because they've gained back the time and their efficiency. Or if you want to use that choice to just fill it with more patients, more work to get done, make more revenue, whatever that might be. So I've stopped kind of saying AI replaces people, because it doesn't always replace people. Sometimes it just gives you the choice. It always gives you the choice because it does create that capability. That's just a very blanket sort of AI comment. Yeah. The other space I would say, it is going to advance clinical work in a way that is sort of befuddling to me. Can't predict what that's going to look like, but I would say that every time I have a conversation with folks in the pharmaceutical space or the clinical trial space, the capabilities of AI and the models that can contribute to the speed at which new treatments come about is powerful. On a personal basis, I'm not a big medicine fan. I'm very much an individual that loves food as medicine as a concept, expand it from there. And so what I would love to have happen is actually for AI organizations to stand up capabilities to advance the science of how food and nutrition and better health, how you take care of your body, actually impacts your future health, and less about whether or not we can develop the fastest, research to pill dispensary way to cure some illness, right? And that is a thing that I really believe AI should be tackling. I don't want AI to solve the problem after it's happened, the sick care space. It needs to solve the how do we just be healthier humans. And part of our organization is protecting human data from badly behaving agents. I think AI should be one of protecting human sickness and protecting human health so that we end up in a place where sickness doesn't even come in until you just fall off the cliff and die. I don't know if I've mentioned that before, but it's my thing. I want to climb Mount Everest and then fall off the other side and just die. I don't want to slowly just wither away. I want to live until I'm just not healthy enough to live, and then that's my day. So that's a couple of predictions, a couple of statements, and a couple of wishes, maybe.
Perfect. I like it.
Fair
Lines well.
Well, thanks, Travis. It's been great. We really appreciate you having you on the podcast today, and we look forward to hearing what you guys think about what was shared today. So please leave any comments if you are so inclined, and we look forward to having further conversations about AI in the future.
Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.